Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is pro-revenge story. Original question: if a coworker is stealing your food and you address the problem by putting something in it that makes the thief sick, can you be prosecuted for that? What if you put your name on it and leave a do not eat note? Author: Melissa Wright. Many years ago, the early 2010s, my dad came home complaining that someone was drinking the iced sweet tea he took for lunch. He'd get ready to eat and half would be gone. He didn't know if they were using a cup or drinking straight from the thermos, and considering the group he worked with at the construction site, he wasn't going to take any risks. This left him with only water for lunch. This happened several times, and he finally decided to do something about it. "I've had it with this tea thief," Dad said, pacing around our kitchen one evening. "Tomorrow I'm going to fix this problem once and for all." He went to the local pharmacy and asked for the strongest laxative they had. The pharmacist, Mr. Jenkins, raised an eyebrow and asked why he wanted one that strong. "Someone at work keeps stealing my tea," Dad explained. "I just want to teach them a lesson." Mr. Jenkins, an older gentleman who had been running the store for most of his life, shook his head firmly. "That's a bad idea, Rick. Could cause severe dehydration and other problems. You could get in serious trouble." Instead, he handed my dad a bottle labeled Essence of Peppermint and told him to use the entire bottle in the thermos. "And if anyone asks what's in the tea?" Dad asked. "Just say don't worry about it," Mr. Jenkins replied with a wink. "It's truthful. Drinking the entire bottle will only settle your stomach if you have indigestion, nothing more. But the taste—" He chuckled. "Well, that's another story." The next day, Dad took the spiked tea to work. Sure enough, at lunch, he found the spiked tea had been tapped again. He recapped it and turned to his lunch buddies. "Looks like my tea thief struck again," he said casually. "I'll soon know who it was." He pulled out his sandwich and ate his lunch as normal. About 15 minutes later, a coworker named Brian came stomping over, his face flushed and holding his stomach. "Rick!" he shouted. "What the hell did you put in that tea, man?" Dad looked up innocently. "Don't worry about it." "Don't worry about it? I feel like my mouth is on fire." "What did you do?" Brian demanded, panting slightly. Dad just shrugged. "Maybe you shouldn't drink other people's beverages without asking." Shortly after that, Brian left work claiming to be sick. Dad just smiled and continued his afternoon shift. That evening, his phone rang. It was Brian's wife, Jessica. "Rick, what exactly was in that tea?" she asked, trying to sound stern but failing. "Brian's been moaning that you poisoned him and his breath smells like he ate a peppermint factory." Dad explained about the peppermint essence and suggested she call Mr. Jenkins at the pharmacy to verify it was harmless. "So he's not dying?" she asked. "Not even close," Dad replied. "Just teaching him a lesson about respecting other people's property." She was laughing too hard to even say goodbye as she hung up the phone. The next day, Brian avoided eye contact with Dad, and mysteriously, no one ever touched Dad's thermos again. The next one is an entitled people story. This happened about 2 years ago when I was still getting used to the idea that some people will go to incredible lengths to control what doesn't belong to them. For context, I'm the CEO of a mid-sized tech company that I built from the ground up over 15 years. It's been incredibly rewarding, but the job comes with long hours and constant stress. That's why, about 5 years ago, I bought a beautiful piece of forested property about an hour outside the city. It's my sanctuary. 43 acres of mixed hardwood forest with a modest cabin I had built right in the middle of it. The property borders a newer subdivision called Meadowbrook Estates. When I first bought my land, there were only a few houses in that development, and the HOA was pretty laid back. The original board members were reasonable people who understood that my property was completely separate from their community. We had a good relationship. I even let some of the neighbors use my forest trails for hiking, as long as they were respectful. But then the neighborhood filled up, property values went up, and unfortunately, a new HOA board got elected. The kind of people who think being on an HOA board gives them unlimited power over everyone within a 5-mile radius. The trouble started when the new HOA president, let's call him Mr. Power Trip, decided that my forest property was somehow under their jurisdiction. His logic was that since my driveway connected to one of their streets, and since some of my trees were visible from the subdivision, my property was part of their community aesthetic, and therefore subject to their rules. I got my first violation notice on a Tuesday morning. It was a certified letter informing me that my unkempt forest area was in violation of the community landscaping standards. They wanted me to clear cut about half my trees to maintain sight lines and install decorative lighting throughout the forest to match the subdivision's aesthetic. I called the HOA office and politely explained that my property wasn't part of their community. The woman on the phone seemed confused but said she'd look into it. 2 days later, I got another notice, this time demanding that I attend their next board meeting to discuss my continued non-compliance. At the meeting, held in the community center, I found myself sitting across from 5 board members who all seemed to think they were running a small country rather than a suburban HOA. Mr. Powertrip started the meeting by informing me that they'd done their research and determined that my property was indeed subject to their authority. When I asked to see this research, he produced a map that had clearly been drawn in crayon on copy paper. It showed the subdivision boundaries extended to include my property, despite the fact that I had the actual surveyed property boundaries and deed that proved otherwise. I pulled out my surveyor's map and deed, spreading them on the table. The surveyed boundaries clearly showed that my property was completely separate, with a significant buffer zone between my land and theirs. The original subdivision plat, which I'd obtained from the county, confirmed this. Mr. Powertrip barely glanced at my documents before declaring that they were probably outdated, and that the HOA had expanded their jurisdiction to include properties that affected the community's visual appeal. That's when things got really weird. He leaned back in his chair and delivered what he clearly thought was his trump card. "Look, we know you're some big-shot CEO, but around here we don't care about your corporate success. You can either comply with our community standards or we'll make sure everyone knows what kind of neighbor you really are. In fact, here's our ultimatum. Either quit your CEO position and dedicate yourself to properly maintaining this community property according to our standards, or give us full access to develop your forest land as we see fit." I stared at him for a moment, genuinely shocked. The other board members were nodding along like this made perfect sense. They wanted me to either quit my job or hand over my private property for them to develop, essentially demanding I give them 43 acres of prime real estate worth well over $1 million. When I pointed out that what they were demanding was completely illegal, Mr. Powertrip smirked and said they'd consulted with legal experts who confirmed their authority. He claimed that property deeds could be superseded by community interests, and that HOAs had broad powers to maintain community standards. I asked who these legal experts were. Turns out it was his brother-in-law who'd taken some paralegal courses online. That's when I realized I was dealing with people who had absolutely no understanding of property law, legal boundaries, or basic reality, but they were so confident in their imagined authority that they weren't going to back down from reasonable explanation. So I decided to give them exactly what they were asking for: proof of my property boundaries and legal status, but I was going to do it in a way that would make their demands very, very expensive. I told them I'd be happy to provide definitive proof of the property boundaries and legal status. I said I'd hire a professional surveying company to conduct a comprehensive boundary survey of not just my property, but the entire area where their jurisdiction might be in question. I'd also retain a real estate attorney to provide a complete legal analysis of property boundaries, HOA authority, and any potential boundary disputes. Mr. Powertrip practically gleamed with satisfaction. He said that was exactly what they wanted, and once the survey proved their authority, I'd need to comply with their demands immediately. I agreed to their terms, but added that since they were so confident in their legal position, they should be willing to cover the costs of the survey and legal review if it turned out they were wrong about their jurisdiction. After all, if they were right, I'd be paying for everything anyway as part of my compliance. They agreed immediately, probably thinking they were getting expert validation of their authority for free. What they didn't realize is that I knew exactly what a comprehensive boundary survey of the area would reveal. I hired the most thorough surveying company in the state and the best real estate attorney I could find. I told them I wanted a complete analysis of all property boundaries in the area, including historical surveys, deed research, and a full legal review of HOA authority and jurisdiction. 3 weeks later, we had the results. My property was indeed completely private, located entirely outside the subdivision boundaries with a significant buffer zone, but that wasn't the interesting part. The interesting part was that the surveyor discovered that the subdivision itself had been incorrectly mapped when it was developed. The actual surveyed boundaries of Meadowbrook Estates were about 30 feet smaller on each side than what the developer had originally claimed. This meant that about a dozen houses in the subdivision had driveways, gardens, pools, and in some cases entire additions that were built on land outside the subdivision boundaries, land that was actually part of the original county right-of-way or adjacent private properties. Even better, the HOA's own community center, where they held their meetings and kept their offices, was built partially on land that didn't actually belong to the subdivision. The legal analysis was even more damning. Not only did the HOA have zero authority over my property, but they'd been collecting fees and enforcing regulations on properties that weren't technically part of their jurisdiction. Every violation notice they'd sent to homeowners whose property improvements extended beyond the actual subdivision boundaries was invalid. Every architectural approval they'd granted for work done outside their actual boundaries was meaningless. And because they'd been operating outside their legal authority for years, property owners could potentially sue for damages, illegal fees, and violations of their property rights. I called Mr. Powertrip to let him know the survey was complete and invited the entire board to meet at my property for the presentation of findings. They showed up with smug expressions, clearly expecting vindication. I met them at the edge of my forest with the surveyor, attorney, and a pile of official documents. The surveyor started by explaining the actual boundaries of both my property and their subdivision. He showed them the GPS coordinates, the official markers, and the legal descriptions. My property was entirely separate and private, just as I'd been telling them. Then he explained what else the survey had revealed about their subdivision boundaries. I watched 5 faces go through various stages of confusion, denial, and growing horror as they realized what this meant. Mr. Powertrip kept interrupting to insist the surveyor was wrong, but professional survey equipment and official county records don't lie. The attorney then explained the legal implications. The HOA had been operating outside their authority for years. Every fee they'd collected from the affected properties was potentially recoverable. Every violation notice was invalid. Every architectural decision was legally meaningless. And now that there was official documentation of the boundary errors, the county would have to be notified. Property taxes would need to be recalculated. Title insurance companies would need to be informed. Mortgage companies would need updated surveys. In essence, the HOA's demand for a comprehensive survey to prove their authority had instead created an official record of their complete lack of authority over a significant portion of what they thought was their territory. But I wasn't done with my malicious compliance. Remember, they demanded that I either quit my CEO position or give them access to develop my forest property. Since they'd now been definitively proven wrong about their authority, I decided to make their demand for access very expensive. I informed them that since they'd insisted on having access to survey and legally analyze my property, and since they'd agreed to pay for this analysis if they were wrong about their jurisdiction, they now owed approximately $48,000 in surveying and legal fees. The surveying alone cost $32,000 because they demanded a comprehensive analysis of the entire area. The legal review cost another $16,000 because they'd wanted a complete analysis of property boundaries and HOA authority. Mr. Powertrip tried to argue that they hadn't agreed to pay for anything, but I had the meeting minutes from their official HOA meeting where they'd unanimously agreed to cover the costs if their authority claims were proven wrong. They'd been so confident in their imaginary power that they'd put their agreement in writing in their official meeting minutes. The HOA spent the next 6 months dealing with lawsuits from homeowners whose properties had been affected by the boundary errors. Several families discovered that improvements they'd made based on HOA approval were actually on county right-of-way land and would have to be removed or relocated at enormous expense. The community center had to be partially demolished and rebuilt because a quarter of it was constructed outside the subdivision boundaries. Property values in the subdivision dropped significantly because of the title complications and ongoing legal issues. And Mr. Powertrip? He resigned from the HOA board after 3 different families filed personal lawsuits against him for his role in the boundary misrepresentation and illegal fee collection. The HOA eventually paid the $48,000 in survey and legal costs, though it took several months and threats of additional legal action. As for me, I kept my job as CEO and my forest property remains beautifully undeveloped and completely private. I even put up some discreet private property signs along the boundaries just to make sure there's no future confusion about jurisdiction. The new HOA board, elected after the old one resigned in disgrace, sent me a very polite letter apologizing for the previous board's behavior and confirming that they understand and respect my property boundaries. I still let some of the neighbors use my hiking trails, but now I have them sign a simple waiver acknowledging that they're guests on private property. Sometimes I wonder if Mr. Powertrip learned anything from the experience. But then I remember that anyone who thinks they can demand someone quit their job and hand over $1 million worth of property probably isn't capable of that kind of self-reflection. The moral of the story: be very careful what you demand from people, especially when you're demanding they prove you right. You might get exactly what you asked for. The next one is a petty revenge story. We recently bought a new cat tower. We have 5 cats who play hard, and the old tower was definitely showing use. The cats had torn up the carpet in sisal, vomited in one of the cubes, and decapitated the hanging mouse, whose name is Earl, because why not? We set up the new tower, and after asking around to our friends, couldn't find anyone who wanted it, so we took it out to the curb to get rid of it. Large trash pickup was coming up, so we figured if anyone wanted it, they would have plenty of time to grab it before trash pickup. In our neighborhood, as long as the item is not on the curb for more than a week, you won't get cited for having trash in your yard. No big deal, right? Oh no, it's a big deal, because Karen and Kevin have decided they want the tower. I work from home, but my office is in the back of my house. We have a Ring camera, and around 10 a.m. one morning the doorbell rings. I am in a meeting with my boss, so I check the app, see that I don't know who these people, Kevin and Karen, are, and go back to my meeting. About 45 minutes later, the doorbell rings again. Now, I'm out of my meeting, and since I'm expecting packages, I check the app, see that it's the delivery guy, and then head out front to grab my packages off the porch. I hear the notification going off on my phone as I'm opening the door, and there stands Kevin and Karen with my packages and the cat tower. Kevin is holding my packages. Me. Can I help you? Kevin. We are interested in the cat tower. Me. Go for it. It's been left out for large trash. You can have it. May I have my packages, please? Karen, the carpet in the sisal on the tower is torn. I'm going to need you to fix that before we take the tower, and there is vomit on it. That needs to be cleaned as well. Me. I'm not going to fix anything on the tower. We are throwing it away. If you want the tower, take the tower. If not, it will be picked up later this week with large trash. Now may I please have my packages? Kevin, obviously realizing I'm not concerned at all about the state of the cat tower. Well, we still want the cat tower. I'm just going to leave it on your porch, and we will come back with our truck this weekend and pick it up. He is still holding my damn packages. Me. That won't work for us. See, we are trying to get rid of the tower and I don't want it on my porch, which is why it is on the curb. So, if you want the tower and you aren't going to take it right now, I'm not going to hold it for you. Please give me my packages. About this time, my phone started ringing and I needed to get back to work, but I wasn't going to leave without my packages. Just as I am about to get angry with these people, my retired military grizzled biker-looking neighbor pulls up in his pickup truck. He is a big pussycat, but very protective of us, and especially our 2 daughters. My neighbor calls over to me and starts heading over to where we are standing on my porch. I guess Kevin got nervous, so at that point he shoved my packages at me and then said, "Well, just leave the tower on the porch and we will pick it up when we can." Yeah, that's not gonna work for me. And when Kevin and Karen walk off, I turned to my neighbor and asked him to help me carry the damn cat tower back down to the curb. A little while later, I had to run an errand, and when I got back, the stupid cat tower was back on my porch. Y'all, what the absolute stupid. Hell, my kid, F19, got back from class a little while later and asked why the cat tower is back on the porch. I told her the story. She rolled her eyes and groaned, and I went back to work. About 30 minutes later, she came into my office laughing. Me. What did you do? MK. Took the cat tower back down to the curb. Me. How? That thing is heavy as hell. MK. It was really easy once I took it apart and put all the hardware in this Ziploc bag that accidentally fell into the trash can with the used cat litter. So if Kevin and Karen want the cat tower, it's still available, but they will have to go dumpster diving for the hardware. The next one is a malicious compliance story. A little bit of backstory to help explain some of the later facts. In the military, every piece of equipment gets preventative maintenance done on it to maintain it in good working condition. In the Navy, we have a very well laid out maintenance system with step-by-step instructions on how to do every bit of maintenance, with instructions so simple a monkey could do it. Part of these maintenance procedures lists required tools, parts, materials, and test equipment, and they are also extremely specific, detailing the length requirement of your screwdrivers, the brand of your gauges, etc. The management of this system the Navy uses is called the Maintenance and Material Management System, 3M, or Planned Maintenance System, PMS. As an electrician, we owned all electrical distribution equipment on board, and for jobs without an electrical training background, we also owned the actual equipment. So the electronics technicians with electrical training could maintain their own electrical equipment, but the cooks, culinary specialists, without an electrical background relied on us to maintain their equipment for them. Now, if you've ever used a commercial flat-top griddle before, you know you set it to a specific temperature you want the cooktop heated to, and not a 0 to 9 inches dial like your stove at home. Part of maintaining the griddle was checking the calibration of this temperature setting once every year or two. I forget how often this check was, but it wasn't a frequent check. Relatively early on when I got on board the ship, young EMFN, junior electrician, Gwen BD94, was assigned to do this maintenance check. So I gathered all of my tools, parts, materials, etc. In doing so, I couldn't find the proper temperature sensor for our calibrated temperature gauge. We had the round-tip ambient temperature probe for use in the ovens, but not the flat-tip surface temperature probe for use on a griddle. I asked a different supervisor to my favorite supervisor for help, and he couldn't find it either, so we ordered a new one, and he said he'd take care of the paperwork for the maintenance check. Being new and unfamiliar with the system, I let it go and never questioned when the maintenance check disappeared from the maintenance list the next week, meaning someone accomplished it, hint hint nudge nudge, and all was good. The next time this maintenance check came up due, we were on deployment, and it was again assigned to me. By this time, we had a new supervisor, and I was now EM3, slightly less junior electrician, Gwen BD 94. A bit more knowledgeable. I looked where we kept all our calibrated equipment and couldn't find the flat-top temperature probe I knew it needed, so I asked my supervisor. He found we had one on order, but didn't know that we had one in the shop and told me to figure it out. Knowing that was an unlawful order and would amount to lying about the check and could bite me in the ass later, I said I wouldn't do the maintenance without the right equipment, and since he couldn't lawfully order me to, we started putting a note on the check that the tools were on order, and delaying it. This went on for about 3 months until the check was about to go red, move out of periodicity, and cause negative numbers on out maintenance reports, and I was again ordered to figure it out or I'd be written up. I refused and raised the same issue to my boss's boss, and we tore the shop apart trying to find the right equipment but couldn't find it, so he told me not to worry about it. Later that week, while I was on watch as a roving watchstander, allowed to walk around the ship and even required to, after dinner one evening, I saw a newer, more junior electrician, let's call him Empha Timmy, even more junior than I initially was electrician, in the galley, kitchen, working on the griddle. I took a step into the galley and asked him what he was doing, and lo and behold, he was doing the maintenance check. I asked him what temperature probe he was using, and he showed me the one for the oven. I explained to him the issue and told him if he signed the maintenance check it would be gun decking, lying on official paperwork, and he could get in trouble but let him make his own decisions as an adult. He decided to continue doing the check. I giggled and continued on with my watch. After my watch, it was nearly 10 p.m., so I went to bed for the night. About an hour later, I got woken up, being told my supervisor needed me in the galley. I signed, figuring it was about the check, and I was going to get that earlier threatened write-up. After getting dressed and making it to the galley, the entire electrical shop was in the galley troubleshooting the griddle. You see, EMFA Timmy got to the step in the PMS where it said to use a screwdriver to adjust a dial until the thermometer read the same temperature indicated by the set temperature. When he measured it, it was off by about 150 degrees, so he kept turning up the heat. Eventually, it was hot enough to melt the griddle's built-in over-temp protection device, instantly shutting the stovetop off. Turns out, he did need that temperature probe. I was tasked with helping come up with a solution to fix it, because the griddle was a critical piece of equipment for the cooks, and we had no replacement parts to fix it. I asked EMFA Timmy if he ever finished the last steps of the maintenance card, turning the grill off, putting it back together, reporting completion of the PMS. He told me he hadn't. I turned to my boss and said since the maintenance check I explicitly advised against doing without the proper tools was still ongoing, and I was informed I could do the maintenance or be written up, I'd stick with my original decision and refuse to do the maintenance. He could write me up in the morning during working hours, but in the meantime, I was going back to bed. Have a nice night. In the morning I did indeed get written up, but for the insubordination, not for refusing the maintenance check, while my boss's boss looked on with the biggest crap-eating grin at me for holding my ground, and my supervisor was pissed at me. Turns out, I was right, and we couldn't do that maintenance check without the right equipment. This remains one of my write-ups I am least ashamed to have ever gotten, and I'd take it again in a heartbeat to give a giant I told you so middle finger to idiot middle managers. I later found an electronic record of the counseling chit my supervisor got for tasks people with doing maintenance without the proper equipment, because I laid out that this was a known issue we didn't have the right probe for years and threw his ass deep under the bus. Hated the guy. We got the right probe in about 6 months later. The next one is an entitled people story. As a single-digit age kid, I spent my summers working for the family business, one part of which was running the concession contract at a small local music venue. Popcorn, burgers, fried chicken, pre-made salads, drinks were the bulk of what we had, but there was a small formal dining area, about 30 tables, on a patio overlooking the wooded ravine. These tables were by reservation only, but on super slow nights without a lot of reservations, walk-ins were allowed. For this restaurant area, we did not have a liquor license, so we couldn't serve wine with dinner. Sorry, getting a license for a seasonal, weather-dependent outdoor venue that was only open 2 hours a day, 5 days a week just wasn't worth the hassle. And since we were just the concessionaires, it wasn't even our venue, so we couldn't get one on our own if we wanted to. One of the most common types of shows would be a symphony orchestra or well-known string ensembles. We had major concerts with B-list and former A-list stars sprinkled in, but those were outnumbered by the classy performances. And where you have classy performances, you have uptight snobs who can't eat a bite of food without wine. They know they absolutely deserve it, and nobody had better tell them no. For most people, we would say we have no liquor license, so, and listen carefully here, we do not serve or sell wine. We also cannot tell people it is okay to bring their own wine. Again, listen carefully. We cannot tell people it is okay, as in we cannot give permission. Liquor laws. Enter the entitled couple who are making a reservation on the phone. We had a steady trickle of people like this, and the conversation always went the same way. Couple, it was always the wife. What kinds of wines do you serve? Us. I'm sorry, we do not have a liquor license, so we do not serve any wine. Couple. What kind of restaurant doesn't have wine? This is a very special occasion, names the occasion as if that made a difference, and we can't enjoy it without wine. Can't you make an exception just this one time? Us. We apologize, but we do not have a liquor license. Couple. Well, can you get one? How hard can it be? Us. Silence. Couple. Well, we'll just bring our own and then you can serve it. Us. I'm sorry, but without a liquor license, we cannot serve wine, and the venue does not allow alcohol to be brought through the gate. Note. We had nothing to do with the venue or the gate. Their policies were their policies. And while there was technically a rule against bringing in alcohol, people routinely brought in picnic meals and snacks to have on the grassy areas. And while there was a rule against bringing in alcohol, they did not check bags or coolers with Michelob brands on them. For some of the big concerts like Three Dog Night, US Family Kids could get like $50 in aluminum a night after the show was over, with us racing the venue ground screws to collect as many cans as possible. Couple. So we can't even bring our own wine in? Us. I cannot give you permission, but they don't check the bags. The owners told all of us to word it exactly like that. We weren't allowed to tell somebody they were allowed to bring in booze, but since we were under the venue's policies and their official policy was to not check the bags, we could say that. About half picked up on the dance. You don't check the bags at the gate? Well, would we be in trouble for having wine with dinner? We do not serve wine, that's all we are saying. I don't suppose you have any wine glasses we could borrow, do you? Certainly. Would you be borrowing 2 or 4? Do you have a corkscrew we can borrow? Absolutely. Great. Party of 2 for the Got a Clue family. We look forward to seeing you then. The other half would yell, scream, insult, threaten, bully, cajole, plead. If they would just shut up and think for a moment, they would be able to pick up what the others did, but they wanted to fight. They wanted to win more than they wanted to chug their $3 chuck and pretend to be grown-ups. They wanted to pretend to be classy for a night, but they clearly weren't. People who don't listen when being told how to get things done when permission can't be given really need to stop and think. I once tried to help a guy keep a brand new $8,000 furnace without giving him permission, but he wasn't listening, so he walked away with nothing. I felt really bad for him, but there was nothing I could do. The next one is an entitled parent story. One piece of annoying and honestly stupid advice my parents have given me throughout college is that the location of my internship / first job after college should be a priority. For context, I'm from the suburbs of Massachusetts and will be working in big tech, NYC, after I graduate from college this spring. This is at arguably the most prestigious company in the field. Note. I'll use terms like mid-tier company and top company, not to sound pretentious, but just to give context on the situation. Throughout college, my parents would insist that I find jobs in Massachusetts. The only reason they're fine with most places on the East Coast is because it's not that far from home. However, if it was something like California, they see that as a significant negative. Honestly, although I never really had too much of a problem with location of my internship's job, this advice affected my mentality throughout college. Freshman and sophomore year, instead of applying anywhere and everywhere, I would not apply to internships far away because I was subconsciously thinking of what would please my parents. Even junior year, I applied to internships out of state, but if asked what I prefer, I would always mention East Coast and even had the mindset that a job in Mass would be ideal. I even told a recruiter in an interview once that location was a top priority because I prefer to be close to my family, even though this was really only because of my parents. For my junior year internship, all my internship offers were out of state, so it didn't matter. My internship was at a top company. However, I think since I wasn't used to advocating for myself against my parents, if I had gotten an internship at a less recognized company in Mass, my parents might have convinced me to take the latter internship because of location, even though the former was much better for my career. I know this because sophomore I worked at a good defense contractor, which was very good for a sophomore internship. However, the internship is definitely not as good as a big tech internship for junior summer. When I got an offer at a big tech company, my dad suggested that I try to see if I can get a better offer at the defense contractor. Although you can negotiate, it's clear that the defense contractor can't compete with the big tech company in terms of salary, and my dad knows that. And internship salary wasn't the thing that mattered, it was new grad salary. And although the contractor provides a good salary for new grad, the big tech company provides a much better salary, even accounting for cost of living. The only reason my parents were even suggesting to still consider the contractor is purely because of location, which is terrible advice. Also, it wasn't even just about salary. The specific big tech companies I got offers from are better for career growth than the defense contractor. The only thing that was better about the contractor was location, which I don't think is crucial in most cases for a new grad. It's really only now that I realize the location of the first job shouldn't be the main priority, especially if it's in a big tech hub like NY or Cali. If the only option at my company was to work in Cali, I would have still advocated against my parents to take it over a worse offer in a close location, even if the latter offer was still decent. My parents honestly expect me to sacrifice what's optimal for my early career for their comfort in me being close to home, which is honestly stupid. When I have a conversation about this subject with my parents, their argument will be, what if there were a job that pays the same in Mass? A hypothetical job in Mass for new grads that pays similarly as to the top company I'll be working at doesn't even exist in the first place. There are obviously times where it makes sense to make these sacrifices, like if you have kids and a family. But I'm literally a college grad. I don't understand how my parents think it should be a priority. Obviously, I think it's reasonable to make it a consideration if you have multiple competing offers in your hand. But making it a main priority as a college senior searching for jobs is completely ridiculous. And the fact that my parents keep insisting is honestly annoying. I'm glad I ended up muting this advice while job hunting later in college because it honestly could have damaged my early career. This may sound like a rant, but I'm wondering if anyone has had a similar experience and how you handled/would have handled this situation. Anyway, thank you for watching.